The award-winning and highly respected Culinary Arts program at Joliet Junior College provides world-class learning and hands-on experience that cover all aspects of the culinary industry. Accredited by the American Culinary Federation Education Foundation, JJC's Culinary Arts program provides training for future chefs, pastry chefs, bakers, caterers, restaurant and food service managers, and entrepreneurs. Students learn by working on the latest equipment and state-of-the-art facilities that were built in 2017. JJC's City Center campus features 2 fully functional student-run restaurants that provide students with the ultimate in both back-of-house and front-of-house learning experiences. The Culinary Arts faculty is composed of full-time, multi-certified culinary and hospitality industry instructors with a combined total of over 140 years of industry experience. JJC currently offers an associate degree in culinary arts and 3 baking and pastry arts certificates. Students pursuing a certificate or degree in the Culinary Arts program will learn the relevant skills needed to eventually become a supervisor, manager, or business owner in the culinary and hospitality industry. Visit jjc.edu/journey for more information.
Welcome. My name is Professor Eric Bell, and I teach in the Culinary Arts Management program here at JJC. I'm standing in one of our beautiful labs, the demo lab here at the school, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about wine and food pairing over the next couple of weeks. This is an example of some of the classes that we have to offer you here at the school. And so initially, before we get into the pairing of wine and food, I want to talk to you a little bit about just, really the idea of aromas and flavors and how do we taste wine, and talking about structural components in wines. And so we have this term in our industry, it's called typicity. And really what we're talking about is typical flavor and structural and aromas that we would find in particular. We call them varietals. So a varietal would be like a grape. So if you're drinking Sauvignon Blanc wine, Sauvignon Blanc is the grape, or we would call that the varietal. And so from a typicity perspective, I would say that Sauvignon Blanc, if I was drinking a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, I would say that it is really acidic and has a lot of citrus flavors and grapefruit and lime and a nice balance of sugar and maybe some minerals and some acid and some grass. And so herbaceous kind of things going on. And so we would consider all of those different sort of flavors and components of aromas, we would consider those to be what we will call typicity. Okay, so the tasting ritual. So I'm going to go through how to do this, and then moving forward, I'll actually pick up the glass and kind of go through with you and show you how to do it. So we call it the 4 S's, right? The tasting ritual. And so really, what we're looking at are the 4 S's. We're looking at we're going to see first. So we're going to kind of look at the wine, kind of determine different things in the wine from just looking at it. We're then going to swirl the wine around and smell it. That's our second S. Kind of smelling for the aromas in the wine, and then we're going to sip the wine, right? And we're going to sip the wine to kind of pick up the different flavor profiles and structural components. And then, we can spit or we can swallow. And I always think about being out in Napa Valley, going to wineries at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you're tasting wine at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you have plans to go to 4 or 5 different wineries. And so for me, it was always in the tasting rooms at 9 o'clock, spitting the wine out, and the people next to me laughing at me because why would you pay for something and then spit it out? But I wanted to be cognizant. I wanted to be able to go to the next 4 or 5 different wineries and then be able to, at the end of the tastings, kind of go out and kind of hang out at, maybe a restaurant, or maybe go do some sightseeing or whatever. So I was always kind of in favor of spitting. So the wine that we're going to kind of talk about today is this Riesling. It's called a Spätlese. I've poured it here for you, and then I'm gonna kind of go through the tasting with you, and then you can you can either go to the store and you can pick up a bottle of it and kind of taste along with me later, or you can just kind of listen, and you can, if you have another glass of wine you want to do that with, you can do that with also. So this Spätlese, right? This Riesling, this is a German Riesling from the Moselle region. The Spätlese category kind of signifies this as a late harvest. It's like 7 days after the typical harvest would be. And so what that does is it kind of helps develop some more of that residual sugar in the wine. This wine's going to have a little bit of sweetness to it, kind of giving me some options with it while I'm trying to think about a pairing, how I would pair it because of that sweetness. Okay, so looking at the wine, right, there's going to be some clues for me when I'm looking at wines to try to kind of start to tell me about maybe where the grape was grown, how old the grape is, what type of climate it was kind of grown in. Did it go through any kind of barrel aging? Did it go through any kind of, was it stainless steel aging? Is it an older wine? And so those are all things, even as I'm just looking at the wine, I'm trying to draw those conclusions in my mind before I actually put the wine into my mouth. So, right, if I'm looking at a white wine, it's got a little bit of a green hint to it, like a straw yellow color. For me, that tells me cool climate. Tells me probably a very young wine, kind of bone dry, acidic, stainless steel aging. I start thinking about the flavors and the smells. Typically, you're talking about tree fruits like pears and apples. And then as the wine ages, or maybe the winemaker did something to the wine, like use oak barrels, it's going to kind of start to go farther into the yellows and the golden colors. Right, and so I could assume at that point in time, maybe it's a little bit of a warmer climate. I'm looking at more tropical fruits like mangoes and pineapples. It's possible that it had some oak barrel aging, or it's possible that it has a little bit of residual sugar in it, or potentially it's been in the bottle for a while and it started to oxidize. With red wines, it's kind of pretty similar, right? We're looking at red wines that are really purple or ruby red. It's going to indicate a youthful wine. We talk more about, red fruits when we talk about these, younger, probably not minimal or not a lot of oak barrel aging, right? And so, and then if it's a wine that's kind of red wine that's kind of gone a little farther down that colors thing and gotten to reddish, or even brick red, it's going to be a little more evolved, probably a little bit places where the temperature is a little bit warmer. It's kind of starting to show signs of age, potentially some heavy oak barrel aging, right, or bottle aging to go along with that. So again, as we're talking about this and we're looking at it, and we're not just looking at it to try to just like look at it and see what it looks like. We're trying to really start to draw conclusions in our minds about what maybe the wine is before we actually start to taste it. Okay, so real quick, I'm just going to kind of go through this with you really quick and talk about it, and then we'll do it. So, right, we want to make sure that when we're tasting wines that we don't touch the glass. We really want to kind of hold the stem of the glass. And the reason for that is because if you touch the glass with your hand, the temperature in your hand is actually going to change the temperature of the wine, right? And so then when I pick it up, I'm actually going to kind of pick it up, and I would typically have some kind of a white piece of paper or something that I could hold it over, and I would look down into the glass. And so what I'm looking for is I'm looking for freedom from particles or some kind of sediment, right? Clarity of the wine. I'm looking into the middle of the wine, right? And I'm trying to see maybe if I have some type down below on the white paper. Can I see the type, or is it really very difficult to see color intensity? And then really important on the edge of the glass, on the edge of the wine, the rim of the glass where the wine is at, I can start looking there for what we call shade of color. And so we can sometimes even at that point in time sort of pick up maybe some of the, the age of the wine. So I might be looking at a red wine that has a little bit of age on it. I might be able to pick up some of that brown sort of brick red sort of hue just on the edge. I might not be able to see it in the center, but that shade of color in the rim is going to be a little bit on the darker side. Okay, right, I'm going to kind of take my glass. You'll see a lot of people kind of do this. I've already poured the Riesling in here for me. I spin it around. Usually with my students, I kind of sort of will have them leave it on the table and kind of spin it around. and coat. And so what we're looking for, guys, is we're looking for what we call legs. And so legs really are sort of when you spin it around, we're going to look at the side of it, we're going to pick it up, and we're going to kind of look. And I'm looking for little streams kind of flowing down the side of the glass. Now, depending on where you're at and what kind of glass and how clean your glass is, you might have to do it a few times just to kind of coat the glass with the wine. And so what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the legs. And so what legs are really are, we're looking for if the leg is really fat and it runs really slow down the edge of the glass, it's going to tell me some things. If the leg is really skinny and it runs really quickly down the glass, then it's going to kind of tell me something else. So let's go through that really quickly. The legs that are really skinny, right, that run down the glass really quickly, I automatically start thinking about what's going on with that. And so for me, what's going on is that, it's a skinny leg, it's going fast, light body wine, probably minimal sugar, probably very young, in temperatures that are really cool climate temperatures. So not a lot of sugar and not a lot of alcohol. If the legs kind of stick to the side of the glass, sometimes you'll even take a red wine and spin it around, right? And you'll look at it and it'll actually kind of coat the glass. You can actually see the red wine sticking to the side of the glass. And so these big fat leg streams coming down really slowly, that's going to tell me a couple things also, right? We're looking at a wine that has a little bit more body in it. We're looking at a wine that maybe has some residual sugar. And then also looking at a wine that potentially has a lot of alcohol or more alcohol in it. Okay, so we're going to go to the second S now, and the second S is smelling the wine, right? And again, you want to be kind of careful with this. If you start smell, and you're smelling 7 or 8 wines or whatever, you're going to get what we call fatigue. So really that first impression is really the most important impression that you can get. You really want to get your nose into the glass and you want to take a good 3 or 4 second kind of smell of it to see what's going on with it, right? And so sometimes if I'm doing classes with my students and we're kind of smelling and talking and smelling and talking, I'll take my sleeve and I'll just put my sleeve up by my nose and I'll just smell into my sleeve. Kind of rejuvenates the inside of your nose and you can kind of get another smell and maybe pick up some more aromas. And we're looking for 2 things when we smell. We're looking for what are called primary aromas. So these are scents that are associated with the grape. So again, we talked about Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand having that really grapefruity, orange, citrusy kind of smell, herbaceous, grassy kind of smells. So again, those are primary aromas that come from the grape or potentially the environment that the grape is growing in. So to give you an example, there's a really beautiful winery in Napa Valley. It's close to a eucalyptus farm. And so a lot of the wines that they make actually, because of the environment, sort of have a sort of eucalyptus smell and taste to them, right? And then the second thing that we're looking for is what we call secondary or tertiary aromas. These are things that would be considered chemical changes, right? Something that's happened during the fermentation process, or maybe the winemaker has decided to do that. Barrel aging that's going to change the flavor and the aromas of the wines. Something that the winemaker has done intentionally or potentially not intentionally that would change what the wine smelled like. And then we use the term bouquet, right? That's the combination of those 2 things, the primary and the tertiary, secondary aromas. And then you'll find most of the time that when you take that first sniff, and I do this with my classes, and 6 or 7 people are saying 6 or 7 different aromas that they smell, or in your opinion, maybe it's different aromas that you smell. We would say that that is a very complex wine. Right, has a lot of smells, things like we start naming 5 or 6, 7 different things. It's a complex aroma wine, right? And more times than not, you'll find that wines that are very complex like that are ones that are going to be a little bit more expensive, okay? All right, so I'm gonna just kind of, as I do these, I'm gonna kind of smell. So I'm gonna swirl it around. I'm looking at the edge of the glass. So with this particular Riesling, guys, I have some legs that are going down. They're actually going down very slow, almost kind of creating like a lake going down, super thick, very slow, sticking to the side of the glass. So to me, what that makes me think is automatically that this wine is got some sugar, which I'm sure it does, and I know it does because I've tasted it before. Because of that, it's kind of sticking to the side. It probably has maybe some alcohol, and the body's going to be a little bigger. Right? It's going to feel a little bigger in my mouth. So I'm going to smell it now. And again, we talked about that typicity, right? And I know that Rieslings from this area in Germany, from the Moselle region, are really going to be kind of apples and raisins, and it's going to have this really beautiful, like petroleum smell to it, a little slatey because the ground is kind of slate ground. And so I'm kind of thinking about that before I put my nose in, and I might convince myself that that's what it is, but I'm really going to kind of smell that and kind of think about those typical smells that I would smell from these Moselle Rieslings. Okay, so just that. So really beautiful apples, honey, raisins. I definitely get that petroleum. It's almost like a rubber band, petroleum Band-Aid smell. And I know that's not something that we would like to taste. You can't really taste it. Those petroleum smells and those slatey smells are more in the aroma aspect of it, not as much in the taste aspect of it. So that's kind of what I get from this. Okay, so when I taste the wine and I put the wine into my mouth, I really want to kind of make sure that I'm kind of rolling the wine around in my mouth, getting some oxygen in it, kind of swirling it in my mouth. And then the other thing I always tell my students is I really want you to be cognizant of making sure that you get the wine onto all parts of your tongue, right? And so we taste different structural components in different places on our tongue. So right on the tip of your tongue, you're going to taste sweetness. Right? On the side of your tongue, you're going to taste bitter or sourness. Kind of in the middle side of your tongue, you're going to taste some of the saltiness flavors of wines or foods. And in the back of your tongue, you taste that kind of bitter taste. And then the other thing I always try to tell my students is we have this structural component called tannin that is kind of dries your mouth out. It's weird. You put something wet into your mouth, and then you swallow it, and your mouth turns really dry. Almost like you put sand in your mouth and spit the sand out. And so I always tell my students, make sure you swish it around, all around, top of your palate, because that's kind of where you get that dry sensation, in your gums, to really kind of get that sensation of that in your sort of in your taste profile. Okay. So I'm going to just taste this. I'm going to smell it again. Kind of the same things. Again, I'm going to take a sip of it. I'm going to put my head down. I'm going to draw some oxygen in, make sure I can get that sweetness on the tip of my tongue, and then swish it around in my mouth. Yeah, so really beautiful apples and just honey. And I can't taste the acid because there's a little bit of sweetness in this, but right now my mouth is watering profusely. And you'll be able to tell sometimes that there's acid there because you'll taste the citrusy thing going on, like a really kind of acidic kind of taste. But a lot of times you won't be able to taste it because this really was beautifully balanced with the acid and the sugar. And so that acid was kind of masked a little bit for me, but after I swallowed the wine, it definitely hit my mouth and made my mouth water a lot. So, right, so I'm looking for these structural components, right? So fruitiness, be really careful. Fruitiness is not really kind of sweet. It's really kind of like strawberries or blueberries. And a lot of times what happens is you can't taste that in your mouth because you really taste fruitiness in what is called your retronasal passage. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll even kind of, when I smell the wine, right, I'll open my mouth up and kind of suck in through my nose and my mouth at the same time. And then I can kind of get those fruity flavors back in my retronasal passage. Same thing if you think about, right, if you have a cold and you're trying to taste food, a lot of times you can't taste it, and that's because that retronasal passage is blocked. Okay, and again, we talked about acid as another structural component. You might not taste it. Again, your mouth will start to water like crazy after you swallow it. Sometimes you can taste it, but sometimes it's just kind of there after the fact. Sugar or sweetness on the tip of the tongue. We talked about tannin, that's that dry sensation, right? Really puckery, kind of comes from the skins of the grapes, comes from the barrels possibly, comes from maybe the stems or the seeds of the grapes. And then I'm going to talk about body really quick. This one's kind of a difficult one to kind of understand. So body in your mouth, what does it feel like in your mouth from a weight perspective, right? And we use kind of other types of liquids to kind of draw the comparison of the body. And so if I put the wine in my mouth, and in my mouth the wine feels really like water, not the taste of water, but how heavy the water is in your mouth, we would say that that would be a light wine. If we put the wine in our mouth and it feels like 2% milk. This is where it becomes hard, because I'm not talking about the taste of 2% milk, but I'm talking about how the weight of the 2% milk feels in your mouth. Skim milk, 2% milk, right? It feels a little heavier than water does. And so a wine that kind of had that sort of feeling in your mouth would make me think that it was a medium-bodied wine. And then if I were doing a heavy wine, I start thinking about whole milk, or cream of some kind in your mouth. Feels really creamy and textury and really heavy. And so again, not the taste of it, but the actual feeling, sensation, the weight of the wine in your mouth, right? That's the body. And then alcohol really is perceived when you swallow. So alcohol is going to be in the back of your throat when you swallow it. If you take a sip of a wine and you swallow it and it doesn't really, like this wine didn't do a whole lot to my throat when I tasted it. And that's pretty normal. This wine's only about 8.5% alcohol. And so I didn't feel it burn in my back of my throat too much. Wine that gives you a little bit of a burning sensation, we would kind of say that's a medium alcohol wine. We could kind of guess at the amount of alcohol it was. And then wines that really burn the back of your throat, like really make a burning sensation in the back of your throat, we would say that those are wines that have a lot of alcohol in them. So I think of like a Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley, 15% alcohol. You swallow it, it's going to kind of burn kind of in the back of your throat. Okay, so from a tasting perspective, you got to be careful. There's the idea of the temperature of the wine and what the temperature should be is kind of confusing a little bit. So white wine, we should be drinking white wine at between 45 and 55 degrees. The problem is that most of the time in restaurants or at your house, you open a bottle of wine, you put it in the refrigerator. Your refrigerator's 35 degrees. And so when you open the wine and you taste it, you're tasting the cold temperature. You're not actually tasting the flavor of the wine. Cold temperature masks tastes. So all restaurants that don't have the right types of systems in place, coolers in place that can control that temperature are going to have these types of issues. And then same thing with the red wine. With the red wine, you go to a restaurant, most of the time the red wine's kind of stored on its side at the bar. Well, the bar is 72 degrees, which is room temperature. We should really be drinking red wine at what we call cellar temp, which is between 55 and 65. That one's always going to be a problem because most people are drinking red wine at room temperature, 70 degrees, and then we want to kind of serve it at the right temperature, 65, 60 degrees, and people will always say, well, you're not really supposed to make the red wine cold. Well, it's not really cold, but it's at that cellar temp that we really kind of prefer. Okay, so I'm thinking about now as this is the fourth one, right? The spit or the swallow. For me, it would be spit if I was doing a tasting. And what I'm thinking about after I do that, guys, is just kind of the persistence and the finish. What's happening? How long is the aftertaste? Are there things happening in my mouth after I taste it that are not going away? Did it go away really quickly, like in 0 to 5 seconds? Nothing's there. Short finish, right? Did it stay there for maybe 6 or 10 seconds? We would say that's a medium, and then 11 or more seconds, super long. And then you're gonna find, guys, those really short, simple ones, one-dimensional, usually inexpensive wines, right? The ones that really finish long and last a really long time in our mouth, they're gonna be more complex and gonna be a little more expensive. Okay. All right, so that's kind of the discussion on the tasting. I kind of want to move forward and I want to talk to you now about food and wine pairing. So again, we're going to do this. Some of the chefs that work here at the school with us are going to come in and we're going to just go through a series of tasting reds and whites, and we're going to cook some food and we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about the pairing. So just be cognizant, pairings are subjective, I would never force anything on any customer or anybody. If you like white wine and you want to drink that with, red meat, that's fine. It's not something I probably would do, but certainly, it's a subjective thing. Some people might say it tastes really good when you did the pairing, and some people might say, I didn't really like that too much. It's just kind of the way that it works. Some people like the food, some people don't. Some people like the wine, some people don't. So the idea is when we're doing these food and wine pairings, we want to kind of think about wine as kind of being the condiment, right? And so like you have a hot dog, right? And a hot dog is the food, and then we put mustard on it, and it just makes it taste better, right? And so the mustard becomes the wine. Or peanut butter and jelly is another really good example of that. So, right, that's a beautiful combination of that kind of creamy, salty, sweet, beautiful kind of taste combination. So peanut butter is the food, and then jelly would be the wine. Okay. All right, so this is the most important step. Please be careful here. We're going to do 3 steps. The first principle is the most important. 3 steps to food and wine pairing. Number 1 is the most important. It's the most significant step. We call this mirroring the body of the wine and the food, or making the wine, the body of the wine, and the body of the food similar. We do not want to have a wine that is really light-bodied, like that water texture in our mouth, with a food that is just gigantic, full-bodied food. It just won't work. The food's going to kind of mask the wine and make the wine kind of not be significant at all. So to give you an example, Sauvignon Blanc, we've talked about it. It's one of the lightest white wines. I love it. I think it's a delicious wine. It's not something that I would ever pair with like a porterhouse steak with melted blue cheese. I could probably argue that there are some things there that would maybe make me like want to do it, but in reality, because the body of the wine is really light and the body of the food is really heavy, we probably would not want to put those 2 things together. Food type also going to make a difference. Chicken is a really light poultry. Duck has a lot of fat in it, and it's got a lot of flavor in it, and so chicken would be a really light food, and then duck would be a really heavy food. So food type's going to make a difference in your food choices and your wine choices. Cooking method, also important. You poach something in water, it's not really putting any other flavors into the food, and so that would be light. But if we smoked something, all that smoky flavor is going to be in there, and that's going to be a bigger food item for us, bigger bodied food item. So we would want to use a bigger bodied wine. All other ingredients that you put in the food, guys, going to certainly change the body of the food. Cooking temperature, cooking method, type of sauce, other ingredients. You start adding components to the food, we then need to kind of get to bigger wines. Less things, less lighter foods, going to be really better for you if you're having lighter wines. Bigger, full-bodied food's going to be better if you have wines that are bigger flavor. Okay, so that's principle 1. Remember, that's the most important. We want to make sure the body of the food, body of the wine are very similar. Principle 2 is what we call comparing and contrasting. All right, so this one's a little tricky. You got to think about this not from a flavor perspective. We're thinking about this from what we call a structural perspective. Okay? All right, so acid, sweet, tannin, fatty, salty, smoky, spicy. Right? These are structural components. They're not tastes. Acid doesn't have a taste. It makes your mouth kind of pucker, but it's not taste. Lemon is a flavor that has acid in it, but we're not talking about lemon here. We're talking about structural things that are not flavors. So acidic, tannin, sweet, fatty, salty, smoky, spicy. And what we're doing is we're using those structural components in the wine and the food to do one of 2 things. We can do what we call comparing components. We're trying to counterbalance certain interactions between the food and the drink. A lot of times when we do comparing things, we're doing like structural components, like acid and acid or sweet and sweet. Okay? And the one I like really is this idea of contrasting components, right? So contrasting components are structural components, and we're going to look at those, and we're going to try to sort of offset or diminish sort of the structural idea between the 2 when we're doing the wine and food pairing. So to give you an example, right, Sauvignon Blanc, which has a lot of acid in it, right? And then anything that has fat, it's going to work well because the acid and the fat really kind of counteract or diminish each other, and it makes it a little bit more palatable for us as we go farther forward in the meal. Same thing with like making lemonade. Lemons by themselves, so sour, right? Sugar, right? It's going to kind of counterbalance that, diminish those interactions, and make them both taste better. So I love this. I love this whole idea of contrasting different structural components to try to help make the food and the wine pairing a better food and wine pairing. So let's just talk about some of those structural components and what we would do, right? So if we're doing a sweet structure, and we want to do a comparing element with that. So I think about dessert. So at the end of the meal, you have a dessert, and then you're going to have a dessert wine. So now you're doing sweet and sweet, right? And so for me, that's a little bit too much. But a lot of people like to have dessert and have a little bit of dessert wine with it. And so the idea here is if we're going to do that, we want to make sure that the two sweetnesses are equal. The amount of sweetness in the dessert and the amount of sweetness in the wine are very similar. For me, would rather kind of do a contrasting component there. If I have something sweet that I'm eating or something sweet that I'm drinking, I want to kind of contrast that with acid or salt or tannin or spiciness to kind of make all of those elements kind of diminish a little bit so that they kind of coexist and kind of combine together to make it actually taste better for me. A good example of that is this Riesling that I'm drinking right here, guys. I would call this kind of an off-dry Riesling, and Szechuan chicken would be just a fantastic combination. You got the really beautiful sweetness in the wine, and then that Szechuan chicken is kind of salty and spicy, and so it's just beautiful. It's that salty, sweet combination, which is really cool, and then that sweetness in the wine will kind of take that spiciness and temper it a little bit and make it a little bit easier for you to kind of eat. Acid, so if we're looking at an acid structural component, right, again, you got to be kind of careful with some of these because, if we want to do a contrasting thing, counterbalance the acid, salty foods are going to sort of kind of balance it out. I sometimes find with salty foods, salt is kind of as a flavor enhancer, and I think sometimes for me, when I have something that's really salty, it's going to make the acid actually a little bigger and more pronounced. I'm a bigger fan of contrasting acidic things with slightly sweet foods. And then I think of a good example of that, guys, is I'm gonna drink a glass of Pinot Noir that's super acidic, beautiful Pinot Noir with a piece of salmon. And salmon is really, really fatty. And so, sometimes after a couple of bites of something that has a lot of fat in it, it just kind of overwhelms your senses and overwhelms your taste buds. And that drink of that Pinot Noir, the acidity is going to kind of counterbalance that fattiness in the fish. And it's going to just make the next bite taste that much better. So that would be a really good example of a contrasting thing that I would do with acid and fat. Comparing acid and acid. So if I were going to do, this works for me too. I kind of like that acid kind of enhances it. And so maybe like a really acidic wine with a food that has a lot of acid in it. So maybe like a Sauvignon Blanc with a lot of acid, and then maybe some kind of a light salad with a vinaigrette of some type. And that's going to make both of those acid components become even more sort of enhanced in your mouth. I love this one. So this is tannin. So, right, tannin is that dry sensation that you get in your mouth. Take a drink of wine that has a lot of tannin, like a Cabernet Sauvignon or a Zinfandel or a Shiraz. Super tannic, very dry in your mouth. So you got to be really careful with this one too. So tannin, there's foods that are tannic. So I think of like walnuts, and you put a walnut in your mouth, you eat it, it makes your mouth really, really dry. You do not want to put a tannic wine with a tannic food. Same thing with spicy and salty, because they're both going to kind of enhance each other, and they're both going to make, the salty is going to make the tannin more tannic, the spicy is going to become more spicy, and the tannic is going to become more tannic in both. So that to me, I'm not quite sure I would like to do that. I'm more into the contrasting thing here. And this is where the idea of drinking red wine with red meat kind of comes in. So if we're drinking a Zinfandel, or we're drinking a Shiraz or a big California Cabernet with a lot of tannin in it, we want to cook our steaks, if we're doing like a T-bone steak or a New York strip steak. We want to keep it at what we call medium rare. It's got a little blood in it still, right? We call that uncoagulated. And this is such an interesting thing. I like tannin, but most people are going to drink a wine that has a lot of tannin in it, and they're going to go, oh my gosh, that is so dry, I don't like it. Well, take a bite of uncoagulated meat that is medium rare steak. put it in your mouth, take a drink of the wine that has that tannin, and I promise you, you'll like it then, because what happens is the uncoagulated meat actually will temper the tannin. It actually makes the tannin go away, the dryness gone, diminishes it. And then what happens is you can actually taste all of the other really beautiful flavors that are in the wine, right? So there might be some chocolate and blueberries and strawberries and other types of flavors that we would taste in there that are just beautiful, that you can't taste because the tannin kind of masks it. And so that's kind of why we do that idea of kind of combining the uncoagulated red meats with those wines that are super tannic, red wines that are super tannic. So, and if you're going to do a meat and you're going to overcook it to the point where it's not medium rare, or you're going to braise some kind of meat, then you don't need to do the tannic ones. You need to do wines that maybe are a little bit softer, you know, maybe like a Malbec or a Pinot Noir that maybe doesn't have as much tannin in it, Tempranillo, Sangiovese, something like that. And you don't need the uncoagulated meat to kind of temper the tannin, because there's not a lot of tannin in those wines. And then the last one is this idea of pairing wines with salty, smoky, spicy, and highly seasoned foods. Again, you got to be really, really careful here, guys, because you start putting oak wines and high alcohol wines and tannic wines together with this, it's going to enhance everything. So if it's a salty or smoky thing and it's a tannic wine, it's going to become even more tannic and more smoky and more spicy. So again, I'm on the other side of this. I would much prefer to use some residual sugar, some acid. Carbonation is really good, so a carbonated sparkling wine of some kind is going to work really, really great here. It's going to kind of sort of help diminish and make some of those flavors, those salty, smoky, spicy things kind of diminish a little bit in our mouth. Fruit's a really good one here, also going to help diminish some of that stuff. And then the last principle is the principle of bridging. And again, this is not something to me that I find, I think it's interesting. I don't think it's really important. Remember, we always want to go back to that body of the wine, body of the food. That's the most important thing. The structural, comparing and contrasting, always interesting to see how they play off of each other. Bridging is, again, bridging is going to be, we're talking about flavors now. Right? And so not structural components, not acid and saltiness and sweetness, but more flavors. So maybe you're making a duck breast and you're going to do like a blueberry compote. Bridging would be then to have a wine that actually had blueberry flavor in it. And so the bridge is the blueberry flavor of the wine and the blueberry flavor of the compote. Right? And so again, I don't know that for me that is super interesting. I play around with those things with my classes and we try it. And so it might be something you want to try to do, but I don't think it's the most important thing. But it's still a principle. And if you wanted to kind of do that, you could kind of do that. And so that's kind of the idea behind doing a wine and food pairing. The next session that I'm going to do with you guys, I'm going to do with our executive chef, certified master chef Tim Bucci. And we're gonna do the 3 big whites, and then we're gonna do the 3 big reds. And so the first wine that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand. So we'll come in, we'll talk about the wine itself. If you want to, you can go out to the grocery store or go to Binny's or your local wine shop and pick up a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand. And you can kind of do the session with us. You can go along with us and do it with us. And then what we'll do is we'll talk about the wine, and then Chef Bucci and I will cook some food. And then we'll actually sit down and we'll taste the wine and food together and talk about how the pairing went and how we thought the pairing went. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming in today and spending some time with us. We'll be doing these sessions kind of going forward week to week. And so I just want to say bon appetit, and we'll save a seat for you here at JJC. Come and see us. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Great.